Welcome to the Books Applied podcast, presented by WSL Leadership. In this podcast, we talk about an awesome book and how to apply it to your work, sport, or life. I'm your host, Iggy Perillo. Thanks for joining me. For today's episode, I'll be talking about the book Will by Will Smith and Mark Manson, and I'm speaking with the fabulous Fabienne Raphael. Hello, so excited to talk with you about this.
Yeah, me too, Iggy, really.
We've been planning this conversation for a long time, and finally we're making it happen. And but I want to know, you introduced me to the book, Will. You said, somehow we had a conversation and you're like, oh, this is such a great book, and you recommended it to me, so then I read it. But what brought you to the book? How did you first come across it or find it? Or what brought it to your attention?
Oh, surprise, scrolling social media.
Oh, right.
So I was on Instagram and I follow Will Smith, and then I saw a trailer. So I think I bought it when he was still in the pre-launch mode. Okay. So therefore, when it was out, I mean, I had it, and I actually read that book within just a few days, even though it's kind of like a very, it's a big book.
Yeah, it's fast. So you're right. It's a very fast read. Me too. I read it over a weekend pretty much when I read it.
Yes, like me. Yeah, exactly.
I skipped this part at the very beginning, but do you want to introduce yourself a tiny bit and tell us what you do? I don't know if that's relevant to why you follow Will Smith. Probably not, but that's okay.
Well, I'm Fabienne Raphael. I'm an online business coach and creator of the Dream Method, and I help corporate executives, leaders, CEOs, and former athletes monetize their expertise and leverage their career into a successful coaching or consulting business. So that's what I do, and anything that's related to motivation, self-development, sharing stories, learning about people who achieved success is really intriguing, fascinating to me, and I want to learn, and I'm extremely curious. So I know that Will Smith has been working on himself for a long, long time, and he's evolved as a human being. And when that came out, I was like, oh, finally, he shares his story and his journey and everything. So that's really what brought me to this book. And I'm glad I read it because, oh my God, like, I learned so many things about him, and then it helps also understand better, like the journey, and also you could relate to either what you are experimenting or what others are experimenting, and again, like I feel that it's so easy to always judge people out of something that happens, but sometimes when you get the back, the backstory and everything, and also when you hear different people talking about the situation, for example, then it gives you a better idea, and you could actually use, don't use your judgment.
Well, you have more empathy. You have more empathy for people, right?
Exactly.
You know more of their story and what brought them there. And I think this book did a good job of, I'm a fan of Will Smith, I guess. I like his movies, whatever, but not like a super fan. Like I didn't follow him on Instagram, but also was not, super closely tracking his career like a big fan would be, either music or movies or whatever, or TV. Like he's such a multifaceted kind of entertainer, producer, does all these different things all over the place. But I think, so I learned a lot about Will Smith by reading this book. Just like, I heard about that sort of Fresh Prince from Bel-Air was kind of based on his life a tiny bit. And I'm like, oh yeah, kind of, whatever. There's maybe a tiny, whatever. It's not a biography TV show of his life, but being from the city, kind of moving out of the city and different things like that. But the sort of this arc of his life I thought was fascinating because I didn't really know, like, oh yeah, I guess he did music first, then he did TV, then he did movies, sort of in that progression and wound things in between all of those along the way. But I like that I feel like it does show him learning and growing along the way. And I think sometimes he sort of falls back into this, I'm so cool. To me, the book had like a lot of Will Smith ego and then some Will Smith life and times. And I was like, oh, the life and times are cool. I'm like, okay, ego, dial it back for a hot second. Let me tell me more about the life and times. Like for me, reading was like this balance in between, and it bounced back and forth, between those two.
Yeah, definitely. And what I also love is how how vulnerable he was in the book, like how he was transparent about what he was experimenting and feeling. And then, reading the rest of the book, then there are sometimes, stuff that happened. Then you're like, okay, now I know what happened, like, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years before. And now this happens. And I'm like, oh, okay, so maybe that's why. Or just the fact that he opened up about him always feeling like a coward for the majority of his life was like, okay, so that's why that person always had something to prove and maybe was hyper confident or showing up like way more than the normal person, or going the extra mile. Or, when he says that if you want to take him on the treadmill, he beats you because like there's no way he's coming back from that treadmill until like he dies because he wants to win. This obsession about winning. It's like, and proving himself. So I mean, that helped me understand the person better. And also, of course, it helps you relate to, some people that I know, or my own stories sometimes, like, when stuff that might have happened in the past, like keeps haunting you and you're like, oh, I thought this was over, but it's not, like, it's still back, in front of your face. So I guess they made, like, those two authors, they made a good job of relating to the human being side of the story. And I think that's what made me read it out in a weekend. I really think so. Yeah.
Yeah. It really gets into his mistakes. Like, they just put him out there, how he didn't pay taxes for a year and suddenly was $2 million in debt to the IRS and literally had his house and all his cars repossessed, like gone all of a sudden. It's like, at the time, I think it was the mid 90s or late 90s when this happened. I don't quite remember the timeline of it, but it's not when he couldn't have credit cards anymore. He couldn't actually do stuff that wasn't with cash. He had to go to ATMs. He had to, like, physically manage his money in a different way, which is, I think, a story we don't hear very often. We kind of see, like, oh, they, didn't pay their taxes, whatever. Like, we don't quite get it, but suddenly there's this very real part where he just really screws up his business side of his business. Like, his money management was a wreck for, I think it took him a couple of years to sort of get that straightened out and pay off his $1 million tax debt that he owed. But then he does, and then he keeps going. He sort of, I think you're right. He has this really great perseverance, I think, that comes out throughout the book. And he's like a little bit over extra at times. Like, he tells the story about going into this new high school and he just walks in. I forget what happened. Does he punch a kid in the face? It's something. He goes in and he's just like, I'm Will Smith and I'm here right now, or whatever. Like, and everyone at the new high school is like, who is this turkey? Like, what? He's a 14-year-old or something. And I think he gets in a fight and someone punches him in the face the first day. Like, he's just a little bit ridiculous at times in a way that when you see it, like you were saying, that this is him sort of compensating from feeling like a coward or feeling like he's not standing up for himself or other people. You're like, oh, I'm not a psychiatrist, but you can sort of see how he fits these pieces together around, he talks about his dad being a really abusive alcoholic. He talks about his mom leaving. He talks about, like, all these different things along the way, and how the benefit for that for him, the spin/benefit is he pays super close attention to people and how they're acting and how they look. So then later when he's acting, he's like, oh, I know how to act and how to look like this because I've been paying such close attention, because if I screw this up, there are really physical consequences in his home life, was sort of one of the parts of the story. So he's building up this idea of, like, connecting all these pieces through these mistakes, through these hard times, through these, just really challenging situations that he's been in. And he doesn't come off like, oh, woe is me, like, throw me a pity party. Like, I feel like he does a good job of just
owning. He's taking responsibility for everything. And I think that's what makes the book great, because he's very open and I guess he says the truth, like in the book, like you never have the impression that he's putting on a show while he's explaining some stuff, especially like the hard stuff and the deep stuff, and even, like, I don't know if you followed, he had a series on YouTube, like The Best Shape of My Life, that, like, it's 6 episodes of 20 minutes. And he made that series about, like, how he wanted to get back in shape. And at the same time, he was writing the book and everything. So you also see him on, like the you see the backstory, or you hear like behind the scenes. You see him behind the scenes writing the book with the help of his brother was helping him like remember stuff, and also like supporting him. And yeah, you see all the work that he's done like to get there. So I think, again, like it paints even more the human side of things, because he didn't hesitate to have the cameras on him. And it was not easy. He was under a lot of pressure. I think he finished writing the book under a lot of pressure because he was not feeling well for a certain period of time, and he could not write, or like it took really a long time, and his publicist kept calling him and say, well, this is due today, this is due this day, and this is due whatever. And then you also see him realizing some stuff, paying attention to things that he shouldn't have paid attention to, or like you also see the how the human being is evolving through that process inside of that series also. So like just that coupled with the book, I think was a great duo. So if you haven't seen it, I mean, just go and watch it, because it gives you like another perspective on the book writing for sure.
I'll have to check it out. Like you sort of mentioned this, but like the book almost goes from like mistake to mistake to mistake along the way.
That's just what it is.
And then there's like, I made this mistake, and then then I tried to do this thing, and then this worked out really well, and then I screwed this up. Like you sort of see this trajectory of his music, then TV, then movie career. Like his movie career goes crazy, but his family life, he really talks about how he's like, oh, I have this vision of having owning a property with a name, like the property has its own name to it, so we can go to the property with the name, and this is gonna be amazing, it's gonna be huge, we're gonna blah 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 blah. And he has the money to afford it at this point because his movie career is taking off. But then he realizes he's signing his family up for managing a property with a name, not like managing it like, mowing the lawns or whatever, but managing, like having to be at this space that might be farther removed from, urban areas, or I think it's outside of LA, or, it's in California somewhere, wherever his property was. I don't even know if he still lives there. But then he sort of comes around to being like, oh, maybe everyone else doesn't want a property with a name on it and a giant park, and to live sort of out in the countryside somewhere. Like this was his idea that he sort of dragged the family along with. And the family's like, oh, whatever, Will, but then he comes back around to being like, oh, this isn't actually great for them. Right. I need to care about what they think too. Like he sort of has these realizations over and over. Like, oh, wait, other people might care also. I should think about what they, how they're thinking and feeling. I think one of the storylines I got from the book was that he sort of has to take care of himself, right? He's pretty focused on taking care of himself for a lot of reasons. Like you need to take care of yourself and move yourself forward, and his ambition and his drive to be good at all the things he does, and to be financially stable, and to be, a provider for his family. Like he has these really altruistic drives, but at the same time, he doesn't always quite get the empathy for other people. Like it's up and down. I think that's where his mistakes come in and out sometimes are. He talks about going on tour with, I think it was Willow, was becoming like a music like sensation at one point. And then because Whip Your Hair, I think was her song and her like big thing.
Yes.
And then he wakes up one morning and she comes down to breakfast and she's shaved her head. And he's like, whoa. And she's like, yeah, I'm done with that. I'm going to do something else now. And he's like, what? Like he didn't see that coming a little bit, but then he thinks about it. He's like, oh, I totally saw that coming. Like, all these little pieces,
I think that's what I love the most. I mean, especially like when, so if you watch the series on YouTube, there's a part where Will sits with his children and his mother, and then he shares what's in the book and asks them if they're comfortable with what he's sharing. And I think most of it was, I think there's just one little part that was taken out, but most of what he wanted to share, his family agreed. And even there, because the parts he was reading, sometimes he felt uncomfortable reading them. Like, for example, he was talking about how he failed at certain aspects of fatherhood with his children, and he apologized for it. And the kids I feel like his kids were very empathetic towards him, like they were really understanding, and they were like, we know you did your best, Dad. I mean, they don't hold any grudge against him or anything like that, because I think Jaden left left the house like very early. Like he moved out like at a very young age. And I guess it was because of something like that, that he felt he had to move out of the house or anything like that. So, but I mean, how we witness their relationship now, well, in that video it seemed to be like, everything has been spoken about and they have moved on and they have like worked on the relationship and that it's strong and deep and connected now. So these are the parts that I really enjoyed watching, also because especially like towards celebrities, like, and especially in North America, I mean, people idolize way too much, the celebrities and think that they're superheroes or not human or close to God. But I mean, they are human too, and they make the same mistakes as we do. So that's why I feel like we have as much to learn from them than from, your neighbor or someone who shares a very personal story with you. And that's why I really appreciated that book, because I feel that from beginning to end, it was just that, sharing life lessons and sharing how he evolved as a human being, and not saying also that he's perfect. Like he never said that. And I never felt that he was, either like overconfident or over like, oh, this is the type of work I've done and look who I am right now. Like it's not like I really saw him with other eyes, after reading the book. So
yeah, I like what you're saying about how, like, I didn't realize that he had talked with his family, because he does say stuff by name about his family members, and that he went through that with them to make sure it was okay. Because I guess reading it, I'm like, oh, I wonder how his family. I wondered a couple of times, because he's telling some pretty stories that were pretty emotional, or that the other people are not happy about in the story that he's telling in the book. So that he ran those by all of them and they gave their okay is great to know, because, or else it'd be weird to sort of expose his family members in these sort of different ways. But I like this idea of his, like, he's on this growth trajectory. And I think one of the things for me that the book really spoke to was that it's okay to be a tough, big deal and also be actually working on yourself in ways that are specific. I feel like a lot of times we're like, oh yeah, life was hard for me too. And you're like, yeah, whatever, you have $1 million, who cares? Like, I think we blow off a lot of the sort of celebrity books or celebrity, woe is me celebrities, because we're like, well, yeah, you're a celebrity. I don't like what, obviously things aren't hard for you. Like we tend to just gloss over any challenges they may have had because they're a celebrity or they make money or they're, popular, whatever it is now. So I think he does a good job of going into just so many different things that were hard for him and challenging. And I think, and he talks about his own maturity changing. He'll at one point he's like, oh, I wasn't mature enough then to realize this. And so he has, going back and writing about his past, he can see his own growth and maturity, which I thought was a really great thread throughout the book, was this sort of maturity piece.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Definitely. I strongly agree with what you shared. And then I was thinking while you were talking about, an interview that Oprah, he had with Oprah about the book, and Oprah herself said that it's one of the best memoirs she's ever read, because of what he shares in it, and also because of the journey that he accepts to, bring out to the world. I think it takes a lot of humility. For whatever reason, let's say whatever you feel or you think about him, but I feel it takes a lot of courage and humility to decide to share that with the world, with the status that he had at the time that he was sharing it. And it's just it's as if he felt that it was about time to be true to himself and make people understand his journey and when he was where he was coming from, and how he still has, some growth to do, like every one of us, so.
Absolutely. He also is a clever businessman. He gets some good business advice along the way, where he's like, oh, wait, if I have a #1 movie and a #1 song, holy cow, that's amazing. And I think, I don't remember, there was something else he was doing. I think another one of his movies was coming out when this book came out too. So he's like, oh, okay, you're there's some strategy behind this. It isn't just let me just blabber about everything. There is a piece of business strategy, I guess, which doesn't make his stories fake. It's not like he's making up stories. You get the very clear impression that he's being honest about the things in his life and his the challenging pieces a little bit. I tended to believe the challenging pieces more. Then he's like, and then I did all this really cool stuff, and people thought I was a hero. I'm like, okay, like dial that down a little bit, but tell me more about these. I was more drawn to the challenging pieces of the story than the amazing success, because I think like I sort of know, like, oh yeah, he's a movie star, he's a music star, he's done these things. So the success part, didn't need more explanation. I'm like, yeah, he talks about the scene from, I loved it. I forget which movie it was, but where he's running across the bridge with his shirt, like one of his first big like action hero scenes.
Bad Boys.
Yeah.
He didn't want to take his shirt off.
Yeah, he didn't want to take his shirt off, so he's like has his shirt on, but it's open. But then he goes to see a UCLA running coach because he's like watched other movies where people run. He's like, oh, they look like they don't have good running form, essentially. Like he worked on his running form for that little scene. And then later you're like, oh, it's great. It turned out well. Okay, cool.
I like that you mentioned that because it shows how much attention he puts to details. Like even in the, when he was writing songs and everything, like when he was always writing. And then, when he decided that he's not cursing.
Right. Because his grandma was like, hey,
because of his grandmother, when he decided to study like you remember, like there was a part where he had to study some English accent or whatsoever, and then his whole accent changed in a few episodes of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air because he had done too much studying about. Oh
yeah, he was sounding like the wrong person. Like he wasn't sounding like himself anymore, right?
He worked too much on it. Like he's extreme in everything that he wanted to accomplish. Like it's as if you say that people, who succeed go the extra mile, but like for him, it's like not the extra, like it's the 100 extra miles, like,
right.
He always goes like really deep into knowing everything and all the details. And he wants, I don't know if it's like wanting to be perfect, like way too much, but it's crazy. Like, cause I felt sometimes I was like, wow, this is killing him. Like, because when you want to accomplish something, sometimes you have to say, okay, I've done my best here. Or even if it's not perfect, but I feel like it's enough to put it out there.
Yeah. Right.
And sometimes I feel like for him, it has to be like worked and worked and worked again. And instead of, putting it out today, then it would be put out like 2 months later because, oh no, I need to work on this and on this and on this again. But while the majority of people would have probably appreciated it, like when it was, supposed to be ready whatsoever. So,
right. Yeah. The thing, definitely this piece of like perfectionism, but also to me, it comes off as like trying to control the situation. Like he wants to be perfect in himself so he can present himself perfectly, right? Like he wants, and not that he wants to control other people around him, but he has such a tight idea of how to control or present himself. And I think that, like, you can draw these little amateur psychiatry threads back to his childhood where he has to act in really certain ways or around his family, or else his dad might blow up, or else, things might happen. So, I mean, there's your amateur psychiatry moment, right? And so now he's like, that plays out in his life now as being really particular about how he's presenting himself, how he's doing things, making sure that I'm sure he edited this book 4,000 times. I'm sure, he ran it by his family. He does all these different things. Yeah. He trains to run for like a 200-yard sprint with a coach from UCLA, track team. Like he does all these things to make it perfect. I love the story about the Fresh Prince where he studies his lines too hard, essentially, and then he's like sounds really weird, and they're like, "Okay, dude, like you need to dial it back a little bit." But he is just trying to, do the best that he can, and I think it doesn't always land well, and that's like the beauty of the story a little bit. Like he's so driven and so trying to do things well, and sometimes it just falls flat, and you're like, "Okay, maybe you should try it." Like maybe you've done too much, or like you're not quite in sync, or something, it just doesn't quite work out in a lot of times. And that's like human. It's so human. I think it really humanizes him.
Yeah, definitely. The whole thing about like work ethics, I think is to him it's extreme. Yeah.
And I think that's another great takeaway from the book. Like he works so hard all the time. I think it's easy again to look at celebrities and be like, oh, they had it so easy. He just had natural talent. Like there's no natural talent. That's not a thing. He works really hard and has worked really hard. I think he also failed and got back up again many, many times, like in so many different ways throughout this book. And I think it doesn't quite end with like, and I'm an amazing success. Like the book even, you're like, he ends jumping out of a helicopter and you're like, okay, weird, but what's next? Like to me that left it as, I thought it was a weird ending a little bit, but that's, I'm not the artist, whatever. He can live his life. Because like, well, yeah. And then you're like, you basically like the sort of the arc of the book is like he falls and gets back up and falls and gets back up and falls and gets back up. So I guess at the end, this is a giant fall. He's bungee jumping out of a helicopter over the Grand Canyon. So he's like literally falling at the end. So, theoretically he'll get back up again. Like that's, maybe this is poetic.
Yes,
maybe I'm like reading far too much into it, but I think it was interesting. Like I think the lessons of perseverance and the lessons of using what you have and continuing to push yourself and holding yourself to really high standards are great lessons that came out of this book.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
Do you have any other pieces of the book that you want to make sure we talk about before we wrap things up for today?
I think we gave a great overview of what it's like to read it. And I guess we gave some people the idea or the desire to go and get it and just read through it, maybe as fast as we did.
Yeah.
Because,
fast.
It was a very, very interesting, fascinating, life lesson learning book, through from beginning to the end. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you made the great point that we don't always see this story from people that are such a big deal. Like he's such a big deal and just cracks his life open in ways that you're like, oh, whoa, okay. Which I think is a nice, the vulnerability. I think you mentioned that too, is a great lesson. Like it's okay to be vulnerable, even though you he has a very tough guy persona in a lot of ways, but also like a very warm persona in a lot of ways, but like that he sort of needed to be really tough and needed to be really focused and driven in ways at the same time. So an interesting mix. Thanks so much for introducing me to this book.
Well, it was my pleasure. In fact, and then we are introducing other people to that book. So
absolutely.
And we're not paying for it.
Exactly. Exactly. Maybe we should talk some promotional plan with Will Smith. Come on over, talk to us. Exactly. Well, thanks so much for talking with me today, Fabienne. It's been awesome chatting.
Yes, it was fun. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You bet. We'll see you later. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Books Applied podcast. I hope you enjoyed getting to know a new book and learning how to apply its ideas to make your work, sport, or life a little bit more awesome. For more leadership education related content, including conflict management checklists, invitations to a fun free lunch that happens monthly, upcoming classes, webinars, and mastermind groups, please head over to wslleadership.com. Thanks, and have a great day.